Remember the glory days of the midsize sports sedan? We had the Subaru Legacy GT Spec B, the Nissan Altima SER, and the Mazda Speed 6, and every one of them was an absolute riot on four wheels. We're a long way removed from that peak, but after a couple years on the market, I still can't believe it was Toyota that emerged as the unlikely hero we needed. And there should be no more sleeping on this TRD-tuned Camry, because it's the real deal. For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that. Look, Toyota didn't just slap a body kit and TRD badges on this thing and call it a day. A bunch of what you can't see has been changed, but you can definitely feel it. The entire suspension, it has been overhauled, and the brakes are different too, and not just because they are red. The discs in the front, they're almost an inch bigger than the XSE that this version is based on. And then it's got two piston calipers in the front instead of single ones, and even the brake booster and pedal feel have been changed, and this thing has brake-based torque vectoring. And what that means is that when you're going around a corner, well, the inside rear brake will be applied not enough for you to actually feel it, but it's there to cut understeer, and it really does seem like it works. Automakers love to talk about platform stiffness when they launch a new model. And you know, it's usually not something you're going to notice in everyday driving, except the additions to this TRD version of the Camry, they make it a highlight. It's got chunky bracing underneath the car as well as a V-brace behind the back seats. And that means you can't fold them down like you can in the average Camry, but it is a worthy sacrifice for just how crisp this chassis is. And I know some of you probably think I'm crazy for heaping this kind of praise on a Toyota Camry, but it is almost unbelievable how different this feels. And then as far as the suspension goes, full overhaul, like I said. So it's got thicker sway bars front and back, as well as TRD-tuned shocks and springs at all four corners. Obviously the ride is a little stiffer than before, but it's still comfortable. I'd say the difference is that the rebound is shorter. There's not as much suspension travel. So it's not that it's uncomfortable, it's just stuff stands out a little bit more, if that makes sense. I would call it a sort of firm but forgiving suspension setup. And it's really nice. Again, doesn't feel like a Camry at all, but it still soaks up bumps in the road nicely. It just doesn't kind of rebound as much as you might be used to. But then again, nothing about this Camry is going to be what you might be used to. This is a car that has been synonymous with rental fleets and bingo halls for years, so it's crazy that it's genuinely sporty now. So what could be better? Well, what's under the hood? And it is kind of one of those weird things because there's more than enough engine output. It's just that it's not different than the XSE. That part would help it stand out more. That's the only reason I think Toyota should have done at least something to this powertrain. It's a 3.5 liter V6 that makes 301 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. So again, it's not like it's hurting for power here. To give you a little context, it's about 50 horsepower more than you get in the 2-liter turbocharged Honda Accord and almost as much torque. But since this is a naturally aspirated V6, it is really progressive. And this thing will hustle pretty good. Flip it over into sport mode, drop a gear here with this 8-speed transmission. It sounds good. It's got this TRD catback exhaust and it pulls really hard. You might be surprised at what this thing can accomplish. But you know, the really cool part about this exhaust system is that it doesn't drone on the highway like you might think. That is a problem with catback exhaust systems, is that once you get onto the highway, it's just this constant humming sound, but it really does quiet down, and that is cool. But then again, when you have it in sport mode, if you shut traction control off, yeah, this thing will do a nice little burnout too. It's pretty impressive, though. That does bring us to the elephant in the room for a lot of people out there. It's front wheel drive, and it also can't be had with a manual transmission. You get this 8-speed automatic instead, but I don't have a problem with it because it's not an impediment. Just like everything else about this car, it is really well balanced and well packaged. Toyota's engineers did a nice job of building something that's cohesive. Everything works really well together. And that is the highlight of driving this car, is that it's got that sportiness, but it doesn't feel like they focused on just one thing. It is a well-rounded package. And that goes right back to that suspension. There's not a ton of body roll or slop, and there isn't much understeer to worry about, even though it is a fairly heavy front-wheel drive car with a V6 tucked between the front fenders. That might seem like a problem, but it's just not. It really does feel like a bit of a bigger version of the Honda Civic Si in the way it's executed. Now, outside, the vibe is a lot more like the Civic Type R. It's not quite as outrageous and extreme, but you can see that boy racer theme here with the body kit and that spoiler on the back. And I know that might be a problem for some of you for a couple reasons. One of them being it's just so out of the ordinary for a Camry. And it also doesn't make a ton of sense for a mid-size sedan that you plan to drive every day. I know I would personally probably struggle with it as well. I do think it looks good, and it's not too over the top. It's just a little much for a lot of people, but I do think the interior is a lot more understated considering what you get. If you take a look around, I love the inserts in these seats, all of the red accents everywhere, and the red seat belts in all 5 seating positions. That to me is very cool. I know it's something to nerd out on that's pretty small, but in the grand scheme of things, I've driven lots of other cars with red seat belts, and they're either not all 5 positions or they're just up front. So it's cool that all 5 are here, and they look great too. And then you've got the TRD embroidery in the headrests as well. Now, some of the plastics in here, not so nice, but that's something I've complained about with the Camry for years now. Some of it feels pretty scratch prone, and this stuff up here on the door just isn't all that great. There's some other weird stuff here, and that is the way it's packaged, because like I said, this is based on the Camry XSE V6. But if you look at that thing, it's right around 43 grand before tax, whereas this TRD package, it actually brings the price down to 38.5 grand. And it's not often you see an add-on package actually cut the price, but there are some sacrifices that come with it. So the touchscreen is 7 inches instead of 9, which is no big deal to me, but the bigger problem, no satellite radio here. And I complain about that a lot, but especially when you're getting this close to 40 grand before tax and you don't get satellite radio, that is a huge problem for me, bigger than the fact that this only has a 6-speaker stereo. And then some other stuff to talk about. Well, you've got heated front seats, but no ventilation up here, and that's something you get with the XSE. And then the steering wheel, it's not heated here. And the big head scratcher for me, just about every other Camry trim has a heated steering wheel, and the only difference between this one and any of the other ones is the red stitching here, so I don't understand why that is something that Toyota took away. There's also no head-up display, no sunroof, and no dual zone climate control, but the good news is all the advanced safety stuff is the same. So you get forward collision warning with pedestrian and cyclist detection, lane keep assist with some steering assist that works out on the highway, adaptive cruise control that works in stop and go traffic, and blind spot monitoring with rear cross traffic alert. And I really do commend Toyota for giving you all of that stuff, especially for the packaging. Considering some of the other sacrifices that were made here, I'm glad none of it was on the safety front, because this isn't one of those sports cars that I talk about where I say I'm fine living without that stuff because it saves weight, because this is a Camry. And that's one of the coolest things about this car, is that even though it looks a little bit extreme and the performance is way beyond any other Camry I've ever driven before, it still kind of behaves like one. You can use it like a Camry. Sure, it doesn't feel like one in the suspension tuning, but as far as the space inside, I've got a ton of it. The trunk is huge, and it's just very driver friendly. That to me is one of the big takeaways from this thing. It's the recipe of the original sports sedan back in the early 2000s, that Legacy GT Spec B, that Mazda Speed 6, or that Nissan Altima SER. And it's nice to see it still exists here, even if it's in a package you might not expect. To recap, I like the ride and handling of the TRD-tuned Camry, the interior accents, and the overall performance it delivers. I don't like some of the stuff you lose, like satellite radio, that it looks a little too aggressive for an everyday sedan, or that there are no engine upgrades. I've never done cosplay before, but I'd have to imagine this is what it feels like the first time. It takes some guts to do it in public, but once you get over that initial fear, it is incredibly fulfilling and fun. Turning heads behind the wheel of a Camry? Yeah, didn't think that was possible, but here we are. And I think Toyota deserves some credit for actually making this happen when no other mainstream brand would. The only people that are going to criticize the lack of a manual transmission or the fact it's front-wheel drive, they wouldn't buy one in the first place. Toyota actually managed to make the Camry cool, and that is something I think every real enthusiast should celebrate.